I want to tell you the story this morning about a woman named Betty Guadano. Betty was born to drug-addicted parents, and she learned early on that her life was very different from her friends' lives. If she needed food, she learned how to steal it. If she needed clothing, she could steal that too. When her friends' families all went on vacation, her dad went on vacation to jail. They moved every few months because they were evicted, so she knew how to start up a new home, live in a new space. By the time she was 15, Betty was introduced to meth by a friend at school, and she fell in love with it. Meth made her feel so much better. She decided she was never going to stop using it. When she was 23 and her little sister was 18, Betty's parents decided that life was just too hard and they were done. So they intentionally overdosed. And Betty and her sister found their bodies. They had left a note for the girls. They left $300, which was all the money they had in the world. And they left a stash of pills that the girls could sell to make some money. And Betty said that day she realized she had a decision to make. She could either walk away from using drugs because she could see the path where it would lead her, or she could take every drug known to mankind and end up just like her parents did to honor this legacy that they gave her. And she went with the second choice. She says, in her own words, she became a dumpster for drugs. She took every drug she could. And she decided she would be as mean to as many people as she could, and she would take as many drugs as she could, and she would last as long as she could, and then she would die like her parents did. Now, she did overdose a few times over the next many years, probably 10 years or more, until one day when she had taken so many different substances that she died. She could see her body laying on the bathroom floor, but she was above somewhere. And she quickly decided she must have ended up in hell. Because as she was in this other space, she saw the people she had hurt over the years, every single one of them. She not only saw them, but she felt their pain, and she felt her own. She felt her family's pain growing up when she was a girl, and she felt that feeling her parents had when they decided they had just had enough. She felt nothing but pain. And at first she struggled against it, but then she thought, why not be in hell? Life has been hell. What difference does it make now? And she just gave in. And the moment she gave in to that pain, she heard her father's voice. And her father said, Betty, you deserve all the love in the universe. And she heard his voice, and she realized that he was there somewhere, and so she began to follow this voice. And he said it again, you deserve all the love in the world. And as she followed the sound of his voice, she ended up in a different place, a place of light that so many people describe when they've had a near-death experience. She was in that place of light, and there were figures, and there was one in particular, a being of light that talked to her and explained to her that she could not stay in that place. But you see, she wanted to stay there so badly because she finally felt like she belonged. She felt love. She felt joy. She felt like this was a place where she was always meant to be, and she did not want to leave it, but this being of light told her, you cannot stay here. You have a mission to finish. You have work to do. And she looked down, and she could still see that broken body laying on the bathroom floor, and she said, I am not going back into that. This poor body had sores and infections all over the skin and no teeth, a young woman who had already lost all of her teeth. But the invitation was there. The invitation was offered to her for a new life, a better life, something different. And Betty waited out, and she decided she would go back. She took that invitation for a new life, and she entered back into her broken body. Now, the word took is important. because we see that word twice in the first two parables that Kathy read for us today. Took is a word I want you to hold on to for a moment. Now, we're still in Matthew chapter 13. It's been 3 weeks, and I have to tell you, I have lost sleep over these parables. They are not easy. Remember, they are stories that tease our mind into active thought, and they're like that box of chocolates. You bite into it and you think you know what you're going to get, but you're surprised because there is something else in there. So you see the outside and it is no indicator of what's inside, right? Now, Maurice Nichol, who is a mystic and an author who's long passed, said that there are at least two interpretations for every parable. There's the external interpretation that everybody kind of knows and accepts. And then there's the internal interpretation. So it is like a chocolate, right? You know what's on the outside, you don't know what's on the inside until you start to chew on it. So let's look at our first two parables. And I want you to listen for that word took, because you're going to hear it right away. There was a man, the kingdom of heaven is like this. There was a man who took seed and planted it in his field. And the seed grew to a shrub and then to a tree, and the birds of the air nested in it. The second parable is its pair. There was a woman who took yeast and mixed it with 3 measures of flour. Now, you don't know this, it's not in the Bible, but I'm going to tell you, 3 measures of flour is 50 pounds. And when that yeast does its job, she will produce more than 120 loaves of bread. So this is a small amount of yeast that she took and this big harvest of bread. So we know pretty easily what the external meaning of the parables are, right? They're both the same. The kingdom of heaven starts small, a seed, a pinch of yeast. But once it is planted or hidden in the dough, it begins to do its work, and you cannot stop it. It's going to expand, it's going to grow, and it's going to be something much larger than when it started out. That's a wonderful, wonderful interpretation that we all hold on to, and we were probably all taught that. There's a couple little problems with that, with both of those stories. First of all, a mustard seed is not the smallest seed, and it does not grow into a tree. So Jesus is stretching the story a little, okay? It's also a weed. Now, do you remember last week we talked about wheat and weeds? And we said there are no weeds, there are only plants that human beings make a judgment about and value one plant more than another. So there really are no weeds. But the disciples would be imagining when they heard this story that the mustard seed is a weed. It would be like all of us, we have a beautiful lawn, we dig up somebody else's dandelion and we plant it in our lawn because it's pretty, you know, yellow flowers. But the next year our whole lawn is filled with dandelions. We don't do that. When we have something like that in a parable, that's the moment when you got to stop and chew for a minute. Same with the yeast. In the Bible, especially in Matthew's gospel, yeast is equated with sin. Jesus says, beware the yeast of the Pharisees. There's something in their teaching that is not good. At Passover, the Hebrew people would get all the yeast out of their house. They could have no yeast in the entire house before they celebrated their religious feast. So yeast has a bad connotation, just like the weed. But the woman takes the yeast. She took it and she worked it into the flour, into the dough. So that lets us know there's something else going on here. Because the kingdom of heaven probably is not like planting a dandelion in your yard, and it's certainly not like sin. So what's the deeper meaning? And of course I went back to the mystics again, because they seem to have these things figured out. Imagine for a moment that you're the man and the seed that you take is Jesus' teaching. Now it could be, we could say it's the Word of God, but I want to caution you, when you say the Word of God today, we all think it's the Bible. But the Bible did not exist in this form when Jesus was sharing these words. So it is Jesus' teaching, or it is words of compassion and love and hope and acceptance and mercy and joy, right? It is the good news. So the man takes the teaching of Jesus and he plants it in his field. Now, This is where you have to remember what we said over the last 2 weeks. What's the field? What's the dirt? It is all of you. You are creation. God reached into the clay and the soil and formed humans and breathed life into them. You are the soil. So when the man takes the teaching of Jesus and plants it in his field, he's planting it in himself. And as it grows, he gains understanding. He begins to understand all these things that Jesus is talking about. And it grows into a tree that cannot be moved. And the birds of the air, whenever you see that in a parable or a story, it is often thoughts, ideas, and beliefs that are flying around our heads. And sometimes they land and we think, oh, that was a great idea, or I'm going to believe that from now on. Those thoughts, ideas, and beliefs have to submit to this tree of understanding that is growing in you. Very different meaning, don't you think? But the same thing with the woman. She took yeast and she mixes it into the 3 measures of flour, which is herself, her body, her mind, and her spirit. And the yeast works its way through the whole batch of dough, and then she is changed. You cannot separate the yeast from the bread. And dough and bread are very different things, aren't they? So there's a whole process that she goes through. And at the end of it, she is a different person than when she started. That is what the kingdom of heaven does to us. Now, when Betty came to, she's laying on the bathroom floor, and she's in a lot of pain. And she struggled with this invitation for new life. She didn't know what to do. And she tried to take some drugs for a while just to escape that pain. She thought she was crazy. I mean, how many people come back from overdosing and say, I talked to God, and I talked to these angels, and all this stuff happened? They just would think she's tripping out, like always, right? She even thought that. But the drugs were not available to her, and when they were, they weren't working. And she ended up going through withdrawal. And she says day 3 of a heroin withdrawal is absolutely the worst. You just want to die. You just want it to be over. The pain is so bad. The anguish is so terrible. And she was in day 3 of this withdrawal. And she decided maybe she should pray. Now, Betty was an atheist. She did not believe that there was a God because her life had been hell on earth from day 1. She has this experience that she doesn't think could possibly be real. But here she is, she cannot do one thing for herself. She's in so much pain, and so she prays. And she hears a voice say, do you want to be healed? And she said, oh, yes, I do. I want to be healed. And then she had a vision where these 2 angels came with some kind of, she calls them lawnmowers, some kind of equipment, and went back and forth through her brain and cut out all the junk and healed all the good parts. And at the end of this vision, she woke up and she had no pain from her withdrawal. She was still addicted. She still had work to do. She had a long road ahead of her, but the pain was gone. She knew that moment. Whatever had happened to her, however crazy it sounded, even if nobody believed her, she had found a treasure, and she was going to hold on to it. And that leads us to our next 2 parables, another pair about the value of the kingdom of heaven. There's a man who stumbles upon, accidentally finds a treasure in somebody's field. It's not his field, but he finds a treasure. Now, back then, what did you do with your valuables? If you were lucky enough to have any, you would bury them in the ground because you had no safe deposit box. You didn't have a safe to put anything in. You would bury them in the ground and hope you remembered where you put them, right? Some of us would not remember anymore where we put the box of our treasure. So this man is out in somebody else's field, and he accidentally finds a treasure, and he quickly buries it again, so nobody will know it's there. He goes home, he sells everything he has, and he comes back, and he buys that field, so he's got that treasure. The second parable in this pair is similar. It's a merchant now who is looking for treasure, he's out pawing through piles of pearls, and he's looking for just the right one, and he finds it, and it is incredible. It is the best pearl he has ever seen in his life. And so he also leaves, and he sells everything he has. And he comes back and he buys that one pearl. Now, we all know the external meaning of the parables, right? That what Jesus offers, the kingdom of heaven, it is worth more than anything you will ever have on this in this life, on this earth. Whatever you have to do, do it so that you can participate in the kingdom of heaven. Now, that's a wonderful meaning, and I suggest you hang on to it. It's a good one. But there's just one problem with that parable about the field. Because it's almost like the kingdom of heaven is like finders, keepers, losers, weepers. What about the guy that owns the field? He doesn't know it's there. Nobody tells him. He lost something he didn't even know he had. And the other guy, doesn't he kind of steal it? I mean, okay, maybe not, but I don't know. I don't know if I like that one when I dig into it a little bit more. So let's think about all of this a little bit differently, right? What could this be? The treasure has got to be the teaching of Jesus, right? And the key word here, in the first two parables, the key word was took the seed, took the yeast, took the invitation for new life. This time, the key word is sell. That word is in both the stories. Sell means get rid of. So what do you have to get rid of to make room for the kingdom of heaven in your life? Some things have to go. Not everything can come with you into the kingdom of heaven. There are some things that you hang on to that have to go. So what is that? What is it for you that has to go to make room for the kingdom of heaven? Now, Betty had a lot of things that had to go, and nobody would want to buy them. She had to get rid of addiction. She had to get rid of her old ways of thinking. She had to get rid of all of her old stuff. And she knew she needed help because she didn't know how to be anything other than what she was. She didn't know how to be a quote-unquote normal person, right? She knew she needed help, but every time she tried to ask for help, this voice would rise up in her head and say, "Don't you dare ask anybody for help. You have always taken care of yourself. You are the only person you can trust. Do not ask anybody else for help. You can do this yourself, or you won't do it at all." That thought almost stopped her. That thought was like a rotten fish, which leads us to our next parable, the last one. The parable of the net. There's this huge net that sweeps through the sea. And the kingdom of heaven is like that net being filled with fish, and you haul it onto the shore, and you open up this net, and you have fish of all kinds, and some are good and some are rotten. Some stink. The word here for bad is sapra, and in Greek that means rotten or decayed. So some of the fish is bad. And the good fish then is put into baskets, and the bad fish is thrown out. We don't even have time to think about that until we have the interpretation right there, the next line. It's the end of the age, and it's the final judgment, and you all are the fish, and some of you are good, and some of you stink. So the stinky ones are going to burn forever, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Oh, I love Matthew. He likes weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew has it in his gospel 6 times. He wants to make sure you get that part. It's going to be bad. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. Luke has it only 1 time, but Matthew, boy, he really likes this phrase. So the common interpretation, that exterior interpretation of this parable is that we are the fish, right? Some of us are good, some of us are bad. Some of us make it to the kingdom of heaven, some of us don't. And it's just like last week with the wheat and the weeds. Nobody thinks they're a weed. We all say, good thing we're wheat. Good thing we're the fish that don't stink, because we're going to get into the kingdom of heaven. But too bad for those people, because they're a little smelly. And that interpretation allows us to judge our neighbors, and it allows us to treat people like they're rotten and no good. So that can't be the right interpretation, can it? And unfortunately, it's been the interpretation the church has stood on for centuries. We have the truth. We know the way. This is the only way. And anybody who's not in is like a rotten fish. They're going to burn. And there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So you don't want to be a bad fish. You want to be the good one. Does that sound like Jesus, friends? Okay. What if it's this? What if the sea is your mind? And those fish are the thoughts, the ideas, and the beliefs that live in your brain. And some of them are great ideas, and they're filled with love and joy and all of the goodness of God. And some of those fish stink. Stinkin' thinking. Have you ever heard that? Some of your ideas and beliefs and thoughts are bad and wrong, and they have to go. They cannot come into the kingdom of heaven with you. You've got to let something go. Now, when you look at all the parables that we've gone over, last 2 weeks and today, they all go together. And it's all about taking the kingdom, the teachings of Jesus, and planting it inside and letting it grow in us and giving us understanding that we didn't have before. And when we have that understanding, some things have to go because we realize they weren't right. And you know, it is the hardest thing in the world to let go of a belief you've had all your life, because it will go kicking and screaming, weeping and gnashing of teeth. Those beliefs that we carry with us as children, you don't need to ask for help. Do not ask anybody for help. You can do it yourself. You've only ever depended on yourself. That idea does not want to go easily. It's going to scream a little. And you are going to have to be like that woman who put the yeast into all 3 measures of dough and works it all the way through so that she is a completely changed person. That's the way to get rid of some of those beliefs. Because usually we believe things because we think they're true. If we knew they weren't true, we probably wouldn't believe them. All these go together. And they all depend on us taking the teaching of Christ, putting it inside, gaining understanding, and then getting rid of the things in our life that have to go because they don't submit, they don't line up with the teachings that Jesus gave us. Do you understand? Anybody? Did I lose you? I lost you 15 minutes ago? Okay. So that's what happened to Jesus too, because he said to his disciples, do you understand? And they all were like, yep, we got it. We know exactly what you're talking about. And they didn't. You know they didn't. These guys have to ask Jesus every 5 minutes to explain something. He asked the disciples, do you understand? They said yes. And then he said, yeah, if you're going to be a scribe in the kingdom of heaven, you're going to bring forth the old and the new. No, you're not. If you do that, you're going to lose the teaching. You're going to lose the new. What happens when you pour new wine into old wineskins? They burst, and the new wine goes all over the floor. New and old do not go together. I'm not really sure what the Greek might have said at one time, but I think it's been fiddled with just a little bit there. I don't think it's a positive thing for Jesus to say, yep, you're going to pull out your old teachings you always believed, and you're just going to add the new ones to it without cleaning out the house a little. So my question for you today is, what are you willing to get rid of? Let me put it to you a little different way. Let me tell you a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a drug addict who suffers her whole life and almost dies. But new life is offered to her, and so she took the new life and she worked it through her body, mind, and spirit until she was healed. And now she helps people who are suffering. She walks the walk with them and helps them. That is the kingdom of heaven. That's what happened to Betty. So what are you willing to give up, to make room, to sell, to get rid of, to stop doing? What behavior, what addiction, what relationship, what habit? What is it that you're willing to give up to make room for the kingdom of heaven?